with our community ahead of time so they can do something about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Yes.
I hope that the people that we've got in here today are individuals that understand that your ethical responsibility is to take the information that you get here today and share it more widely. Do you agree?
Yes.
Too often in our community we have individuals, and there are none of them on the panel today, not Sir Simon Woolley or Lee Jasper or anyone else, other people who sit in these cloistered environments, corridors of power. You know what I'm talking about? Hear this quality information, this critical information, and keep it to themselves. That's why we're in the position that we're in. We do not have enough individuals who consider themselves to be ethical leaders and understand that often they're only in there as a consequence of their representation for the black community. And so therefore the information they pick up in there doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the wider community, and they should be sharing it. So this is the second in a series of events that we're holding around a whole range of topics. The next one is going to be in March, on public health, which is a really important strategic frame that we need to get our heads around as a community, and I won't get into all of that. I want to thank Jane for making us aware, she's chairing this evening, for making us aware of our guests' presence in the UK and giving us the opportunity to get access to her. Too often, what happens is, white organisations, because Transform is a think tank, it's a white organisation, they don't give us access to the entitled opportunities that they have. But Transform is an ethical organisation. We've been in a relationship with them, yes, for a year now. And like all good relationships, what I've learned over the years at great cost, it takes time to develop the intimacy. And we're at that place now in our relationship. So we had to pull this event together at very short notice over the summer holiday. I had my grandchildren. James just had a child. Another round of applause. And it was effortless. But do you understand what I'm talking about?
What to have
What's the child done?
You're always trouble. Where's you?
How would you know?
How would I know? So it was effortless, and that's really important to me, because I've learned that sometimes if a relationship is really difficult, it's maybe because it's a relationship you shouldn't be getting into. But and it's built on personal relationships. So I've struck up a really very strong, trusting relationship with Jane over the last 2 years as representative of Transform. We represent the Blaksox, and we're now going to widen it to other individuals in our respective organisations. So please do give her another round of applause. She's going to be chairing the event for the evening, so I'm going to let her deal with all the rest of that. I just want to say this last bit. Thank you for signing up and then attending, because it's a free event and we know what happens. People sign up and don't arrive. We are going to start charging for events next year, but the individuals that are already on the database who have signed up will not have to pay, because that's key to us, that we see these opportunities and we realise them because we understand how it will benefit everybody else. And we're building up a database of individuals that actually want to be more active, or want to access some of the other resources and connections that we've got going forwards. So if for whatever reason you've come in today and you're not on the database and so on, please contact one of the Blaksox members in here. Can you put up your hand if you're there? Yes? Lee? Give them your details so you can go on the database. There are lots of other things going on which I won't bore you with now. On that note, I think I'm going to hand over to Jane and let her get on with the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Well, wow, what an introduction. Don't know if I'm going to live up to that quite, but thank you very much. I'm really, really excited about tonight's event. The minute that I heard that Charlene was in the UK, I thought, this is the woman that we need to hear from. So, no, I'm going to build you up. My name is Jane Slater. I work for Transform Drug Policy Foundation. Transform is a charity and think tank campaigning for an end to the drug war and its replacement with a system of legal control and regulation. I also manage a campaign called Anyone's Child, which is all about telling the very real stories of the cost of our drug war and using it as a lever to make policy change a reality. The war on drugs, UK drug policy, it was predicated on xenophobia, and the drug policy has systematically been used over the past 50 plus years disproportionately against people of colour, the poor and the vulnerable. This has been documented extensively. Release, our partner organisation, Dave Lammy, MP, has extensively documented this disproportionate impact, and this is going to be talked a lot about tonight. But at Transform, we campaign for change. As I say, we fundamentally see that issues of drugs need to be treated as a health issue, not a criminal justice issue. It's all in the wrong department, right? What we are arguing for is for doctors, pharmacists, licensed retailers to take control of this market and putting out the organised criminal element. But it is essential to us that we hold social justice at the heart of future policy, so that we can learn the lessons and create a policy which has the least harm. Cannabis legalisation is coming to the UK. We're watching US states, one after another, getting legalised cannabis. Uruguay now has legalised cannabis. Canada, the largest G7 nation, also has legalised cannabis. So we are watching an unstoppable trend. And the UK is looking on. This policy is moving. But at the moment, we can see industry, corporate interest, and it is sniffing hard at this industry and rubbing its hands. But we need to avoid a legalised market where the corporate interest overtakes the social justice agenda. And that, to me, is what tonight is about. We're delighted to be joined by Charlene Title. She has been absolutely at the heart of US policy making and ensuring that the interests of people of colour are at the heart of future policy making. We need to listen, we need to learn, and we need to mobilise. I want this to be a really positive night. I think, looking at politics this week, my God, right? But this is an issue where we are watching change, and change happening in a really positive light. Recently in New York, there was a ballot around cannabis legalisation. It didn't actually pass, but not because popular opinion wasn't on side, but because it didn't incorporate racial justice at its heart. That is quite amazing, right? And I think this is a really important thing to hear. We can make a policy that is better. It's a really exciting opportunity. This is new policy making. So I urge people to listen to our really inspiring speakers here tonight. You've got quite a lineup of people. Let's learn some lessons from America. Not everything's going perfectly. There are things we can do better here. This is a blank slate, right? And let's make cannabis policy that re-puts the people who have been most disproportionately impacted right centre stage at that policy. I think it's an exciting time. Anyway, thank you. So to start off our evening tonight, we're delighted to be joined by Sir Simon Woolley. Say that again. Sir Simon. Sir Simon Woolley. Yes.
It ain't not even dry yet, but we give it.
And as many of you will know, he is director of Operation Black Vote, and I'll let you take the floor. Oh, yes,
Thank you very much, and thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. I'm still a bit embarrassed. When I am introduced as Sir Simon Woolley, because you and I know we'll use that these honours and titles were to keep people in their place, right? When I got the letter, it actually on the letter it said Order of Merit. So the British hierarchical system as an order of who's to be merited. And it goes from MBE to OBE to CBE, etc., etc. Now, Lee and I, we've known each other for 30 years in the struggle. And part of the struggle has really been the empire, the institutional racism that has kept us, tried to keep us down, to try to oppress us. And so, being an activist, that I always knew that if the letter came through my door, and this is personal as an activist, if the letter came through my door wanting to highlight me for my life's work, but it had the empire in it, I couldn't say yes. Because if I'm fighting to tear down that institution, it's difficult for me to take an honor in that name. So for all these years, people say, why haven't you got an honor? Why haven't you got an honor? And I just knew why, because I would say no. So when it came through the door and it said, a Knight of the Realm, I said to Lee, I'm going to be a Black Knight. And of course, a Knight of the Realm, that predates the empire. That's in the 12th century. But I was speaking to Lee outside, and I was saying, look, Lee, this is not about me. It's never been about us. It's about what we do. And our mission, as you know, 25 years with Operation Black Vote, it's about our communities. Political empowerment, fighting those causes. And we're talking about drugs policy. And I've been involved in drugs policy on the front line for about 4 or 5 years, joining the global drugs policy project, which is a George Soros project. Some of you may know George Soros, who campaigns for many things, racial injustice, health programs, and drugs policy. They asked me to join. It's a global project based in New York. And I said, I will only join on the basis that you know that I want to blacken the drugs policy text. And I sat in George Soros's swanky house in the Hamptons. Have you been there? No, okay. Big house, trust me. And I said to him and his son and the team, our challenge, black people's challenge in drugs policy, even with enlightened people like you, George and Alex, is to wrestle power and resources from you to us. And not just the resources, but the political narrative. We've got to be in charge of this debate. Because for too long, the drugs policy narrative has been led by white people speaking for us. And let me tell you this, when they speak for us, we have been given less than the crumbs. The narrative has been that if we legalize cannabis, we legalize drugs, then we'll benefit from it. And we've said to them, look, the real change game here is if you're big enough to say, we don't know how this affects your communities. We don't know what the bigger issues are. We will defer to you. We will support you. Because we've said for us, this isn't just about drugs policy. We're using drugs policy to shine a light on bigger institutional racism. The state uses drugs policy to oppress us. So the idea that if you legalize marijuana, everything's going to be fine for black people, we're kidding ourselves. Because it had just moved to something else. But we can focus and shine a light on the worst excesses of institutional racism through the prism of drugs policy. by the fact that tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of black people on a yearly basis get stopped, harassed, humiliated, and searched. And then it goes on and on and on. You're more likely to be arrested. You're more likely to be charged. You're more likely to be given a higher sentence. When I sat with David Lammy on the Criminal Justice Review, the first thing that grabbed me by the jugular and made me weep was the sheer fact that when you look at youth incarceration today and you look at who is being incarcerated, hear this now, 45%, I think this is greater than the USA, as a matter of fact, 45% of youth incarceration is people of colour.
Last year.
And going up. Disproportionately driven by drugs policy. What if that translates to the normal prison population? 45% of people in prison, people that look like you and I. So it's a wake-up call. It's not only a wake-up call for those being incarcerated, it's a wake-up call for those that are dying. And for the families, the ripple effect of what happens to not just the poor individual that is stabbed, but the sister and brother and daughter they leave behind. The reason why I love these meetings is because, yes, we can lay the facts bare, and we really must need to have a wake-up call on what's going on. But even more than that, the reason why I like being with Lee and the Blaksox and this movement and the collaboration with Transform and bringing our international guests over, like Reverend Al Sharpton and Jackson and now we have this great woman being with us today, is because we can talk about political empowerment. Because that's the key. That's the key to turn this around. For so many years, we've always had the moral argument that why you disproportionately stopping and searching black people, why you disproportionately giving higher sentences. We know we're right. Every time you see one of those video nasties of a young black kid being harassed by the police, I saw one, the police officer pulled out his truncheon, smashing the window. The guy was saying, I can't open the window, I've done nothing wrong. We've all seen those video nasties. We all know they're wrong. You have to come back to the central challenge. How do we change it? And we don't change it by saying, please be nice to us. We've got to politically empower ourselves. We've been saying it for 25 years, Lee, right? First step. How can we be in a position where we're not asking for justice, but demanding it? And we've said we've got to follow from our American brothers and sisters that political empowerment is central. It makes me weep when I'll go into a college, go into a community center and say, how many of you here are registered to vote? And they all look to the floor, or too many look to the floor. I was with a brother the other day in Waltham Forest, in Redbridge, and he said, we can't get a football pitch for our kids to play football. And I said, how many black councillors do we have in Redbridge? Where the population for our communities is 15, 20%. How many black councillors? He said, none. How do you expect to get the resources from this borough when you have no political representation? He said, all the other communities, they get them. I said, that's why they're around the table. Because as Lee says to me, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You're on the menu.
1 minute, Simon.
Okay.
Gotta be quick.
Yeah, that's good. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with timekeeping. Let's keep focused. Let's keep focused here. The task at hand. And you will hear great speeches about the detail of drugs policy. Let me just say this in this last 30 seconds. It's not just here. It's not just in the States. It's in Brazil. It's in Colombia.
That's right.
It's in Holland. It's in Norway. Any country you dare to look at, drugs policy is driven on race grounds. The darker you are, the more you're catching hell fire. This meeting, this political empowerment meeting today, we are making links with our black brothers and sisters in the USA, in Colombia, in Brazil, in Holland. This will be a global movement. But you need to understand, you here today, you are the frontline activists. The frontline activists that will make this change. Don't feel the weight of what I've just said. Feel empowered by it. Feel emboldened by it. We've got an election around the corner. I need you on the front line, getting tens of thousands of people registered to vote, making the demands. And in drugs policy, we've got to tell any politician, every politician, we're not asking, we are demanding adult conversation around drugs policy. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Really powerful speech there. Have we got any questions for Simon? I'm sure there are questions. Someone's got a question. Hi.
Just so that he won't feel that no one has a question.
Don't worry.
Thank you.
Okay, hi. At my late stage in life, I am at uni studying IR and politics.
Right.
Because I'm fed up of just talking on the side and want to now just get in there and make a difference. But I feel I needed to have the brief, and it's really interesting what politics is about.
Yep.
But even in the university, finding out from the black students in there about do you vote? You know, many of them do not.
Right.
And I've, been speaking to them, so I understand what you mean. Political, financial, and another one, education, I think it is. Those are the three most important things we, as black community, must be part of. Because if we're not on the table setting the agenda, as you said, others will set
One of the
it
questions
forward.
is, please.
So, sorry,
I beg you.
yeah, it's going. So, I know you do the Operation Black Vote.
Right.
What more can we do to get black people to keep saying that my vote don't count?
Right.
Is there something around self-esteem or lack of?
Sure. Yeah. Now, we buy the narrative. I mean, the powers that be. The powers that be want us to fight against each other and not see the tools that can make a difference. Let me tell you this quick story in 30 seconds. A politician came up to me and said, Mr. Simon Woolley, big shot, black activist, do me a favour. And I said, what favour should I do you, sir? He said, go to the black community and tell them thank you. I said, why should I tell the black community thank you? He said, tell them thank you for not voting. Straight to my face. I said, why should I tell them thank you for not voting? He said, because I don't have to knock on their door. I don't have to listen to them. Right to my face. And he's right. He's right. Look, we've got to understand power. That's right. Understand how it works, where we access it, how we can leverage it. I'm telling you that we have the keys to Downing Street. We have the keys to City Hall. But we've got to stand up and be active. And in that, we start making demands. I love you, my sister. I was a mature student too, to go to school and read the books. When I read Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, please read it. Write it down and read it. Michelle Alexander. I know my brother Sonny, a drugs activist in Wolverhampton. He's read the book. There's another book here too, The War on Drugs and the Global Colour Line, Kojo Karim, black academic here in the UK. We've got to have the knowledge, and then when we do that, and we are the warriors for change, you feel good about yourself.
Thank you.
One more question. We'll go to the man at the back.
Thank you very much. So in a place like Redbridge...
Sorry, can you use the mic?
Yeah, thank you. So in a place like Redbridge, talking numbers now, how many votes would give us a councillor, sort of?
Let me just say this.
Yeah, so
let me just say this. Who's a member of
number?
a political party here? Put your hand up. Put your hand up. Okay, so when you go to your local political party, how many people show up?
There's about 7 in the room.
There you go.
There we are.
There you see right there, 7 in the room. And it's normally those 7 who decide who gets selected to stand. Listen, politics is a numbers game. You don't need money. You don't need influence. You just need the numbers. And we've got to wake up quick. If you went to a room like this for a local party, you would rule the roost. The reason why Momentum at the moment is getting all those people in, because they've woken up to that fact that it's a numbers game. They bring the numbers. They run the show. You don't need much, my brother.
That's not much at all, is it?
No, it's literally.
A handful can make a difference.
But then you have to be chosen.
Thank you.
By God, already.
There's going to be loads of opportunity for more questions, but I'm keen to move on to our next speaker, which is Katrina French, who is the chief executive of an awesome NGO called Stopwatch.
Good evening, everybody. I'd just like to start by saying thank you to Viv and Blaksox and all the panelists here. It's absolutely an honour to be on such an esteemed panel discussing such an important topic. So I'm going to jump right in there and just tell you a bit about the organisation that I run and why we're important and why I'm here today. So Stopwatch is a national organisation that looks at stop and search. We are focused on policy, or shall I say evidence-based research and action. So we have on the chairs today our most recent report, The Colour of Injustice, and I think it's appropriately named Race, Drugs and Law Enforcement. Most recently looked at the gangs matrix as well, and how young black men, or shall I even say boys, black males, are being pulled into the criminal justice system even if they're victims of crime. And then also looked at how mobile phone technology is being used to entrap our young people. So the organisation I run is very focused, or I should speak a bit about myself before, actually. I think I need to do that. About 4 years ago, I got a job at Islington Council, and there was a sign on the wall saying volunteers wanted for stop and search monitoring group. And I have to speak frankly, I'm now in a position where when I go to work every day, I am paid to, in quote, fight Babylon. I am. But there was 10 years where I wasn't paid to do that. I was paid to keep the wheels going within. I was a cog in a machine. I was a bureaucrat, a faceless bureaucrat working in local government. The reason I chose to be in local government is because I wanted to be accountable to my people. I didn't want to go into the private sector after leaving Cambridge University. I made a conscious decision to go back into the community. I worked in the voluntary sector. So I went off to do some post, and there was a sign saying volunteers wanted. So I went along to the meeting. I wanted to be involved in activism. I had some spare time, but also I recognise that you do not get paid. Many of us don't get paid to fight the system. We get paid to just maintain it. So if there's anything I say to people now is, what are you doing to embed your community that you're not getting paid to do? That's the truth, is that's it. So I really value people giving their time this evening to support stuff like this, but what are you doing in your community for your community that's not being paid for? And that doesn't mean you won't be paid for it at some point, but we have to start at the position of not everything is about money. It's about the energy and what we put into it. So I went along to the meeting, and the guy that was the chair was a white guy, and the police officer was a white guy. So I was kind of like, I don't think we're going to get much critical thought in this room. So I went along and I became the vice chair. Lo and behold, the chair ended up stepping down, and I ended up becoming the chair of the Islington Stop and Search Scrutiny Panel. I then went on to chair the London panel, and I have to say, in that room, I echo what Simon says. If you're not in the room, you're not getting discussed and you're on the menu, because out of those 32 chairs of the whole of London Borough, I don't think 10 of them are black. This is old white women, mainly, in some of them their 70s, talking about stop and search law and saying the police are right. So I came into what was a very hostile environment, and I got very bruised. The police made a complaint about me to my work, to Islington Council, because the white chairs were getting information emailed to their house and the black chairs had to go to the police station. When I got involved, I said, no. They said, oh, if you get on with your officer, he'll do this. I said, I don't need to get on with people. I've got friends. I just respect that. I don't come here to make friends. That's a byproduct of what I do. I don't mean to be horrible, but I come here because I have a purpose, and my purpose is to hold the police to account. I want to be in my bed on a Sunday having a croissant and orange and review the data. I don't want to be I was going to the police station 6 hours a month to review the body-worn video and the written grounds. When I got involved, all the people had to start going to the police station, so you can imagine I wasn't very popular. Thank God for my family and friends. So I did that for a few years, and then I got headhunted by Stopwatch. I started taking annual leave from my day job to go to meetings in the day at the Home Office, because all the stuff that happens in the day. You know, these little evening meetings for us, that's not where decisions are being made. That's where we get spoken to. And then Stopwatch saw me and they headhunted me last year, and I feel incredibly blessed. I give thanks to the Most High, my ancestors, for empowering me and putting me in this position. So enough about me. I think it's important I give that, because as much as people see the status of CEO, I was doing community work that got me noted to be there, and I was a byproduct. I never knew I would be in a position to even address a room like this. So I give thanks for it, and I think it's important because people start off not knowing where their journey is going to take them, but you end up on a table with such high esteemed people, so I give thanks. Stopwatch now is looking at stop and search, because we know that black males are up to 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs, which is very disappointing and worrying when we know that the find rate for drugs is actually a lot lower on black people than it is for white people. So I'm going to kind of talk a bit about our stats. So I know on the seat you would have seen our recent report, The Colour of Injustice. In that it explains that whilst we've seen a massive reduction in stop and search over the last 9 years, we've seen 75% reduction. That's mostly been within the white community. So who started out actually having least the amount of stop and search, even have fewer than they did 7 years. Very perverse, very, very perverse. And then what we're seeing is that when you are stopped and found with, let's say, drugs, I'm going to focus on drugs today, over 2/3 of stop and searches for drugs. So whilst the narrative out there and the rhetoric is violent crime, serious youth violence, that's not what's happening in reality. I'll tell you what's happening is, oh, I smell cannabis, I'm going to do a stop. Police officers are basing a lot of their stops on the smell of cannabis, not even seeing drug paraphernalia. I have a very harrowing tale of he was 15 or 16 boy. He wasn't smoking. I think if you were seen smoking, it gives a rise of suspicion of why an officer's come to you. Officers seen 2 young men, 2 young boys, and I have to rephrase that, because often we there's not a word, but you make your young people older than they are. These are children. If you're under 18, you're a pickney, as my granny would say. You're a child. So even if the government is saying, oh, young people, these are children. In a park speaking, the officer approaches them, searches his bag and finds cannabis, takes him back to school. He's excluded from school. And now they say that's a positive outcome. How is that a positive outcome? So I will give those examples, or that particular example of why I do what I do, which is to highlight the injustice of how the law is being used. So 2/3 of stop and search is for drugs. There's places in Middle England, specifically the Midlands, where festivals are going on for 5 days. White middle-class kids called Poppy and Tobias are going off, and they're taking hard drugs. They're not smoking a little bit of weed. This is hard coke, ketamine, whatever. I don't even know what them I take. But they're allowed to do a quality check to make sure no one dies. And now, from a Stopwatch perspective, we endorse harm reduction. We support that. That's what should be going on. But why is it last week at Carnival, little Jamal had 2 officers on his back for smoking a spliff, when we know that cannabis has yet to have killed anybody? So I highlight the how different communities are being policed and how the law isn't being used. If you're in a place like Hackney, where we know it has a heavy police presence, what happens is yes, you are smoking or you're caught with weed. First of all, you get a warning. If I kind of recognise you're a smoker, I'll see you next week. Well, you might have a bit of weed because I know you did last week. I'll stop you again. We're into a fine now. Then we're into a potential arrest situation. Whereas in Kensington, where there's not many stops going on, people who are smoking are not having that level of surveillance or that level of intrusion. So what Stopwatch is saying, and we're not a drugs charity, but the author of this report, Dr. Michael Shiner, Dr. Rebecca DeSole, and our colleagues at Release, along with the London School of Economics, recognises this is an intersect. It's mixed with everything. So whilst we're talking about stop and search, we know that it's being driven by drug law enforcement. It's stupid then not to talk about what solutions can be fixed. It does leave me vulnerable, my organisation vulnerable to being soft on crime, soft on drugs. What we are is we're humanitarian, we're pragmatic. We want to have a society that's not just safe, but is healthy. And drugs should be treated in terms of a health response and not about criminality. You'll be surprised to hear that there were more black people convicted of cannabis possession than white people were of Class A and B supply of drugs. Now, did you hear that? There's more total. So more black people going for convictions of possession of cannabis than white people are for combined supply of class A and B. Now, that's very scary. Now, it's not a surprising statistic because there's more white people in the country than that, but just hearing that we're like less than 4% of the population but making up 25% of the cannabis convictions, something's not right here. Now, the other bit I want to caveat on is that we need to be mindful of the impact, and I think James knows this more than anybody, about drugs on the mind. So we're not out here saying we want every 15-year-old to be able to smoke ganja. That is not the premise here. The premise is that we need to adopt an evidence-based approach to our policing. And at the moment, with Boris and Priti Patel in the Home Office and at Number 10, that isn't happening. There's not going to be any evidence-based. And it's very worrying because we know for the last... I've been looking at cannabis as an area in my personal life for the last 5 years after my sister had cancer. My sister had cancer and she passed away. So we came into understanding the use of cannabis via that. But what was really frustrating for me was there's people's husbands growing cannabis via GW Pharmaceuticals in Salisbury and exporting that cannabis, and yet sitting in Parliament blocking laws about people having access to cannabis laws. And the other frustrating thing is I'm seeing lots of white kids and white families being pushed at the front of this, and it's being used as a healthcare thing. We already understand in our communities that black people are at the bottom of the ladder when it comes to health disparities. So I feel that it's about high time we took it out of the hands and we discussed it and made ourselves, empowered ourselves with the knowledge that we need to do to change stuff. Stopwatch is out here pushing for policy change, but not just policy change, about going into communities and telling people their rights around stop and search, asking parents to support your children and have courageous conversations with your kids about how they're being stopped, what's going on. I can't guarantee that we can hold the police to account, because as we can see, slavery lasted for 400 and odd years. The journey is not one of a sprint, but one of a marathon. But what I can say is that we shine a light on injustice and we call for transparency in everything that we do. However, it doesn't take one person, it takes a village, and that's us. So I really call on you to become well-versed, not just in stop and search law, but drug law, looking at the opportunities and where they're going to come from. And if you're not going to be active yourself as in doing something, don't stop those people that are being active with negative comments or putting people down, because often people are chatting breeze and the people that are doing the stuff need support. So if you haven't got anything positive to say, don't say anything at all, and don't block the way of those people that are steamrolling and trying to bring about change. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Any questions for Katrina? I know you've got some.
Dry bones in the valley tonight. Dry bones.
One at the back.
Hi, can I just give you the mic 1 second? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Greg. I'm the chairman of the UK Cannabis Social Clubs. We've got about 70, 80 community groups around the country. It is majoritively, a white male demographic. We desperately feel like it's completely unbalanced. What can we do to try and help make this issue, more spoken about amongst our community? Because I don't think people realise quite how terrible the statistics are. That's terrible. 25% of the drug arrests for 4% of the population. What do we do to make that more?
Invite Stopwatch to come over, but on a kind of more wider scales, I think there needs to be candid conversations, and unfortunately those spaces I find often neglect race. Racism is an uncomfortable subject for loads of people, and I keep saying we'll continue to have dysfunctional relationships until we have uncomfortable conversations. So one of the things is about leading and inviting people into those spaces that know it. We can't expect, and I speak about younger people because those are the people that are kind of now most impacted, is to come into those spaces and know if they leave, there could, and I'm not saying there is, but there's a othering that happens. So I go to an all-white meeting, I don't know who's in the room, these people aren't necessarily my native people. I leave, I'm getting stopped and searching every other person like at Carnival is walking past. So it's a bit like a neon sign saying I bun weed if you start going to those places. So I think that we have to understand that whilst it's palatable for you to be there, it's not palatable for some other people to be there, and you have to think about the engagement. So maybe going in to youth clubs or VCS settings and having conversations, and you parachuting yourself into those settings instead of expecting some marginalised people to come into a room. I know it's really weird, but I'm quite used to being in an all-white room. Being 3 years in Cambridge, there wasn't many of us there. Whereas for white people, it's quite often uncomfortable for the shoe to be on the other foot, and I think we need to start for other people to be stepping into that uncomfortable journey. But I welcome a chat with you. Stopwatch is more than willing to come and share some of our evidence-based research and to inform people from not a confrontational way, from an academic perspective, and then bringing in how social justice can be achieved via policy.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions? One more question for Katrina. Hi. Yeah.
Here you go, sir.
Oh, he's bringing you a microphone.
Lieutenant Pat
Random
Pasley
going.
from Youth Engagement Projects UK. Yeah. What I'd like to ask is how often do people get stopped and searched for drugs in other parts of the UK, like in Scotland and Glasgow? How often does that happen?
Yeah, so in front of me, our report looked at all 43 forces and Merseyside by far. And it's not black people, but it's just about the high rates of drug searches. They do over 80%. So we're seeing stop and search being used as a tool for drug control when actually in the media the rhetoric isn't there. And once you leave, not just about stop and search, but there's something about congruence. So when you're in, let's say, Kensington, as a black person, you're not meant to be in Kensington because you're not affluent. So you're more likely to be stopped in those areas because you stand out like a sore thumb. And then we have strategic policing of places like Lambeth, Southwark, Hackney, where you're more likely to be stopped just because there's lots of police there, because it's deemed to be an area of inequality, poverty and violence. So in a way, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Your blackness is your blackness, whether you're in Hackney, Kennerton, Avon and Somerset has some of the highest rates of disparity. Dorset has disparity. And I think it's being othered. So very, very good question, unfortunately.